Joining us now is NewsNation's chief Washington correspondent and host of On Balance, Leland Vittert. And you've also done extensive international reporting as well. So, Leland, in your view, what is the magnitude of this situation?
It's certainly very interesting. And you had somebody, for lack of a better term, I think you'd have to use the word defected to North Korea. This is an American service member who, by all accounts, willfully turned himself over to the enemy on one of the most heavily, if not the most heavily fortified border in the world. And one where there's 30,000 American troops on it with the orders to be ready to, quote unquote, fight tonight. Because of just how dangerous the situation there is. I think Joe brought up a couple of very important points. Number one is, what will the United States have to do to get this person back into U.S. custody? Number one, and is that a price we're willing to pay? It's one thing to try and get Americans home like Lisa Ling or Otto Warmbier, who willfully went to North Korea on the idea that they thought they were going to come back to the United States and were wrongfully detained. It's a whole different thing when somebody turns themselves over to the enemy and tries to escape U.S. military justice. I think that the other part of this, and I think what's going to make this so very delicate, is the North Koreans would like a lot of defectors back themselves. There's a lot of people who have defected across the North Korean border in one way or the other, either through China or across the DMZ itself. And North Korea would really love to have those people back and make an example out of them in what they would call their justice system. And how does the United States and South Korea justify saying we want our person back if we're not going to give North Korea their people back?
So, Leland, it's being reported that he willingly crossed the border. Do you believe he understood, the soldier, the magnitude of what he was doing?
Well, he was stationed in South Korea, where every day, and I think this is what you have to realize, the military, the U.S. military in South Korea is stationed there for fear of the threat of invasion from North Korea. Remember, the North Korean War ended in an armistice, not in a peace treaty. So I can't stress enough sort of how dangerous the situation is and how the troops there, from cooks all the way up through the commanding general of U.S. Forces Korea, believe that war might break out this evening, because that's truly a possibility when you're dealing with the Kim family and how crazy they've been over the past 60 years. So it would be hard to imagine that anybody who was breathing couldn't understand how dangerous this area is and how dangerous what they were embarking on would be. The fact that they were at the airport to be sent home and then snuck into a tour group, then went to the DMZ, and then ran across, I think that probably shows intent on more than one level.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's an important point to highlight. So President Biden, as you know, Leland, has not met with Kim Jong-un at all. Do you think this incident will make it more of a priority?
Probably not. There's two philosophies here, really, and frankly, you know, it's hard to imagine, despite what they're saying, that the administration is going to spend an awful lot of time, energy, or currency to try and bring back someone who willfully defected. That you have to wonder, sort of, in terms of the cost-benefit analysis there. But the issue for Kim Jong-un and for Joe Biden, President Trump was willing to meet with Kim Jong-un without preconditions, essentially, right? He felt as though meeting with bad people in the world, whether it be Vladimir Putin or Kim Jong-un or anybody like that, that he could, through force of personality, convince them to change their ways and force them to. The opposite of seems to be true of President Biden, is that his administration, at least in various words, China may be an exception to this, has wanted to have good deeds precede a meeting with the president. And this is the idea that the meeting with the president of the United States is somehow some kind of big gift to a foreign leader. Whether or not you believe that or not is up for decision, but that's kind of how President Biden has handled things. It'd be worth noting, though, that during the Trump administration is when the North sort of got in line in terms of their nuclear tests and their missile tests. Those have resumed under the Biden administration in terms of North Korea's bad behavior.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.